All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing with the tafsir and certainly with tafsir al-Qurtubi. But last time we were actually covering, let me see what you can see first. We were covering the ayah in Tafsir ibn Tafsir al-Qurtubi. I keep on going Tafsir ibn Kathir because last night I was with Jannah Institute and I was saying Tafsir ibn Kathir all the time. So right now, until now, I didn't upgrade the new class. Okay, here we go. So let's really fast before we do anything. We were actually on this ayah, okay? And it was basically وَهُوَ الَّذِي أَنْشَأَ جَنَّاتٍ مَعْرُوشَاتٍ. So this is it, ayah 142, Surah Al-An'am right there. And we were doing this piece of it. وَآتُوا حَقَّهُ يَوْمَ حَصَادِهِ, and the word وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ. So we said the ayah was basically letting us know of the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in abundance. And because it was created in abundance, we're talking about the different produce, the different plants, etc. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا, and do not overspend or basically wander your wealth, for He does not like wandering, does not like al-israf. But then the question that popped up, well, what's the difference between al-israf and at-tabdhir? Although both words may seem that they are very similar, or at least more like synonyms, thought it was very important for us to really see in scrutiny the difference between these two words. Before we get there, of course, the following ayah continues and talks about al-an'am, talks about the cattle, talks about the animals that we basically consume and what good we use them for. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, كُلُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. Eat from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed you with, and do not follow the footsteps of shaitan. Now, of course, when he talked about the plants, he said, وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. But when he talked about the animals, he said, do not follow the steps of shaitan. Well, that's because many throughout different cultures, nations, etc., throughout different times in history, you had people see through the animals as the power of God, and instead of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worship the animals themselves. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. But because of this word, وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا, I thought it would be fair to go in details and actually talk about وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا in order to make sure we fully understand what al-israf really means and what it entails. So I really found this beautiful article right there, and I thought it would give you the translation as well. That was on this website. It was called aluka.net, and al-israf wa darhu fi din. And I thought, the best thing to do, since people, I don't want you to just see the Arabi, and since it's a tafsir in English, thought it would be good to kind of give you the translation. This is an AI translation, so not my translation. It was just a click of a button and it would basically give it to you right there. All right, all you need to do, let's see what you do. You basically, right there, you click this thing right there, or if you don't know how to get there, you basically go to these three dots and then you hit translate and it will translate it for you. It's pretty easy. The translation, like I said, is not necessarily too accurate, but better than nothing. All right, let's see what he says. So, of course, when you're looking at al-israf with tabdhir, many times they do come in the same wording, in the same meaning, but of course there are different ways of recognizing and different definitions for each one of those. And of course, we know that the Quran, in 21 different areas, the Quran did refer to this dangerous behavior, which is al-israf wa tabdhir. So what is israf and tabdhir? Both actually mean the same thing in terms of an extravagance, an excessive or wasting something, excessive use in something. But the questions that rise, is there such a thing as an excessiveness in perhaps being good in excessiveness and probably being in dhikr or doing donations or anything of that? How do we understand the amount of moderation? How do we understand that piece of it? So let's first see, before we explain that in detail, let's look at some of those ayat. So the first ayah, قل يا عبادي الذين أسرفوا على أنفسهم لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله إن الله يغفر الذنوب جميعا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. So in this ayah, let's see how they translated it. Oh, my servants who have transgressed against themselves, do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Indeed, Allah forgives all sins. Indeed, is He who is forgiving, the merciful. Well, I mean, good translation, but it was just the lining of it that kind of got it off the this his statement basically jumping in the wrong place. Okay, let's see. So when it says قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا, speaking to the servants that had asrafu, then within this context, the word asrafu would actually mean that al-israf, and one of the definitions of excessive behavior is excessive behavior in transgressing the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that would be the first definition of israf. Excessive behavior going against the definitions, the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's basically going excessive in letting your urges control you and go beyond the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is the inference here? The inference is that there is this limit, and this limit is to help you recognize where the borders are. And once you recognize the borders and you go beyond that border, then you're going to basically understand that you had been excessive, that you had trespassed the boundary, and that you had been excessive. So any beyond the limit of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as the limit is basically a form of israf. Okay, so within that ayah, is it basically this piece of it, or is it another piece? We'll look into it. وما كان قولهم إلا أن قالوا ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. And their only statement was that they said, our Lord, forgive us our sins and our transgression in our conduct, and plant firmly our feet and give us victory over the disbelieving people. So what they were saying, those are the Salihin? Yes, those are the Salihin. They would say, رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا ذُنُوبَنَا. They would make the dua, Ya Allah, forgive our sins and all the transgression. So now they use the word transgression for al-israf as well, the same word. But this time they added with it israfana, a transgression in our conduct. But in Lugha Arabiya, is this in our conduct or not? Israfana fi amrina in Lugha Arabiya basically means to be excessive in our matters, in what we were basically engaging in. That's israfana fi amrina. And how do we stay basically within the limits? They said, thabbit aqdamana. Ya Allah, keep our feet steadfast, because we have the tendency to go beyond the limit. So this is metaphorical. وَانصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. And give us victory over the disbelievers. Well, how did we get into give us victory over the disbelievers? Because when you say thabbit aqdamana, it's quite interesting. I was listening to this study that said, if you want to anticipate somebody's longevity, meaning health, you basically would look at their legs. So we're talking about the more this person walks, the better posture and the better basically the better ability that their legs are doing, then this is a sign of health and that they have a higher chance of living longer. We would usually think of the heart, we would usually think of kidneys, all of that. But then the study is saying, well, the heart, it would be healthier if this person's making more walks, more steps, more walking, more of that. That's basically going to determine a lot of that. So is this ثبت أقدامنا in terms of that? Well, ثبت أقدامنا is more metaphorical to say, well, I want you, Ya Allah, to keep me and my legs steadfast in order to stay strong. Okay, is that necessarily metaphorical? Is this literal? To stay strong is to stay basically ثبت أقدامنا, keep our legs steadfast? Is this what will keep us strong? It's quite interesting. We don't have an answer for it, of course, because at the end of the day, it is a possible interpretation, but certainly no scholar interpreted this as having your legs alone, meaning literally. All scholars would interpret it that it is more of a kinaya and more of a metaphor that basically refers to a metaphor to stay steadfast on faith. And they would go in details and say, well, if somebody's feet are steadfast, some person's legs are steadfast, that means the rest of their body is standing. And therefore, the rest of the body is basically resembling your commitment from heart to mind to brain to basically your extremities, your own self, your commitment, etc. وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. So what is that supposed to say when you say وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين? Why is that even related? Why is it related? Ya Allah, give us victory over the disbelievers. Because that's to let us know that in order to get victory, it really starts with you having a victory over your own sins. You want victory, you first have to be strong and committed over your own desires and over your own whims. And that is the only time that you will be capable of defeating the kafirin. Because you are standing for one thing and they're standing for one thing. But if you had transgressed the limits, then you're both really close to each other's levels. But Islam tells you, well, to really get victory, you first have to free yourself of all the different strains. And those strains are basically the things that are keeping you from getting victory, or that are keeping you from getting the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to give victory. And in order to get that empowerment, you would basically have to get the empowerment through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And basically first, you would have to go and go beyond the different strains that the disbelievers or the impact of sin and all of that is basically influencing you. Okay, let's see. So of course we've got a number of different ayat in regards to this one. Let's see what Ibn Manzur says. Let me just give you first who Ibn Manzur is. So Ibn Manzur was a scholar in Lugha Arabiya. Okay, Ibn Manzur, scholar in Lugha Arabiya, and he said, السرف والإسراف مجاوزة القصد وأسرف في ماله عجل من غير قصد وأما السرف الذي نهى الله عنه فهو ما أنفق في غير طاعة الله قليلا كان أم كثيرا والإسراف في النفقة التبذير وقيل هو مجاوزة القصد في الأكل مما أحله الله. Okay, the alif ha means in that. Okay, so what did he do? Basically said, well, wastefulness or extravagance and wastefulness are going beyond the limit. Okay, he hastened without intending to. So what does that mean? Means that the person basically used that wealth without intending to basically wasted, and then but then the person went off board as for the and what went off board and then without having the intention to do so. So what is that supposed to mean? That this person had their drive control them and they didn't even think of the purpose. They didn't think of the purpose, and they basically just wanted one thing, which is to probably get to and feed the drive. This is very important to keep in mind. It's about feeding the drive and not necessarily going towards a specific purpose. Keeping that one in mind. So when you look at عَجَّلَ مِنْ غَيْرِ قَصْدٍ, they did not intend to get to that purpose, but then they went beyond the limit without necessarily wanting to do so, but they let their drive them. Okay, let's see. Whether it is, okay, here we go. It is, as for the extravagance that God had forbidden, it is what he had spent in disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, whether it is little or too much. Extravagance is spending in wastefulness. And it was said, it is going beyond the limit in eating from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted. End of al-lisan. Okay, so here's the thing. When you look at this translation, some of it is, I would say literal, but it's not giving me what I would be reading in Arabic, because certainly it was said. When you say it had been said, this is to basically give us just an indication that some scholars, or at least some would more limited to that, or some would mainly keep it within this area, within this boundary, that it's excessive eating and excessive consumption. Okay, the word excessive eating is not necessarily excessive eating in food, but excessive consumption, that you're consuming too much, you're overspending in basically more of a financial type of spending. Okay, let's see right there, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar. Who's Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar? Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, his name is Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Where does he come from? Well, he comes from Asqalan. Where's Asqalan? It's basically in Palestine. How far is it from Gaza? It's basically almost 20 miles from Gaza. In fact, it was actually a province. It was always part of Gaza. So when you speak about Asqalan, you're talking about Gaza as well. Okay, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, he said, what it is going beyond the limit in action and words. So see, beautifully said. وَهُوَ فِي الْإِنفَاقِ أَشْهَرُ. Said it's exceeding the limit in every action or word, and it is more well known in spending, in basically overspending, in financial spending, that is. Beautifully said. Now, what do we get out of all of this? We basically get to just knowing that financial spending is more common in reference to the definition of al-israf, but it's not limited to it. And al-israf would be just exceeding the limit in every action, or whether word, action, consumption. That's basically just to let us know. So any type of exceeding the limit is called israf. Word, action, consumption, behavior, etc. All of these different things are basically going to be considered as this is israf. Let's see this one. So if you say israf is that, I mean, we do see in the Quran that sometimes it would give us israf and tabdhir, but are they necessarily the same sentences? Let's see what Adabuddin wa Din, and what he said. He said, قد يفترق معناهما, said that the meanings may be different. For isarf is basically ignorance in exceeding the rights, And wastefulness is ignorance in recognizing the location of rights. So what does that look like? How do you put that in action? So let's say, for example, you've got certain rights. You're getting people come over to your house. You're getting, I don't know, 10 people. You're invited 10 people. But to put food enough for 20 people, that's basically exceeding the limits within rights. You put them in, you exaggerated the amount of food being put. That's israf. But التبذير is ignorance in where it should be put in. You've got money, but then instead of, let's say, putting it in halal investment, you put it in haram investment, or you might have put it in haram spending. You had the money. It's not that you didn't, but you used it for the wrong reasons. So that's the difference between a sarf and التبذير. Sarf would be ignorance in the amount of rights and where it belongs, and التبذير is ignorance in basically how and where it is spent. Okay, so just keep that one in mind. Let's see, المسرف, the person that is considered a musrif is basically wrong in the amount, and that would be basically excessing the amount, versus al-mubadhir is basically confusing, and their problem is ignorance in recognizing where this should be spent in and what this should be spent in. At the end of the day, we know that Islam regarded that all of this is a triangle that the shaitan would use in order to basically control the ummah. When you say triangle, you're literally saying a triangle? No, we're not literally saying a triangle to mean, a triangle, but we're basically looking at it that there's this area that would be considered, think of it as you are in this space, but there's this area that is considered, let's say, a dangerous area that you don't want to get near, because the second that you get near, you're going to find yourself slipping in it, and then it's going to be hard for you to leave out of it. Think of it as that. And that's that area of israf. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let us know the borders that are permissible for you to roam in, and the borders that are too dangerous for you to roam near. The word is near, because the second you get near it, you're going to get into the susceptibility, and you're going to be susceptible to basically falling within that corner, and then confused at where and how to get out of it. Okay, so we know that in israf, Quran basically said, well, there are certain corners and certain, let's call fit within this triangle, you've got 3 different kinds of israf. Okay, just like we were talking about a shaitani triangle, there are different, of course, every single angle and every single side basically resembles these shaitani triangles. The first one is basically going beyond the limit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first that's the first angle. The second one is going into basically what, let's say, israfun makruh. So the first one is muharram, the second one is makruh, is the hated one, which is going beyond what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given in details of the instructions of Islam and the principles. And therefore, just recognizing where those borders begin, end, and what the instructions are, that can only come with ilm. That can only come with ilm. If the person does not have the ilm, then what they're going to be doing is confusing these borders, and they're going to be finding themselves within the shaitani triangle. Let's see the third one. is israf that is considered within the halal, at least the permitted area, and it would be what Islam had considered as permissible and did not necessarily give a particular type of a border. So, for example, eating cheese. I'm a cheese lover. Okay, eating cheese. You might think it's halal, it's mubah, and then you find yourself to consuming so much of that because you could be thinking that, well, it's halal, it's not haram, and then without you realizing, you're basically getting into a border where sometimes it's a lot harder to recognize those borders. And how do I put a limit, even though it's halal? But how do I put a limit to make sure that I'm not exceeding the limit, even in halal consumption? That's a quite interesting and a quite I would say uh, a sensitive one and very what is the tricky one? It's a very tricky one. So let's go into details with these different types in order to make sure we're not falling in them. So the first one, let's see what they said in English. They said what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted and recommended with conditions, but not restricted a specific limit. So that's the, okay, let's see, for us to understand all of this, the first one is basically the forbidden extravagance. What does that look like? So for example, we're talking about in the Quran had mentioned that certain behaviors were basically al-israf al-muharram, exceeding the limit, and this exceeding is exceeding this limit is basically considered al-israf. Let's see what the ayah basically said. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مظلوما فقد جعلنا لوليه سلطانا فلا يسرف في القتل إنه كان منصورا. Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, let's say, and do not kill the soul which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbidden except by right. And whoever is killed unjustly, we had given them higher and air authority, but let him not exceed the limit of matter taking life. Indeed, he will be supported. Okay, what is that supposed to mean? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically giving us an instruction to not take someone else's life except in truth, in what is right. So I can go kill somebody and say, yeah, I've got the right to do so. No. The Prophet ﷺ basically said that there are only 3 times or 3 different situations where killing is permissible, and that is to be conducted by the government itself and not you. Number 1 is a person al-mufariq lil-jama'a. So first, basically a person that leaves the religion of Islam. That's not for you. Yeah, this person left Islam, let me go kill him. That's not for you to conduct. That's the government. Because this is a capital punishment that only the government has the right to scrutinize, to make sure that all the different conditions basically fall in order to protect the individual life. We need to make sure that no one has the power to take over somebody's life except by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power that he had given basically the government. Let's see. Number 2 is basically a nafsu bin nafs. A person killing another person does not mean that you would conduct it yourself, but it would mean that the government itself would have the right to do the capital punishment in cases where somebody had killed somebody. All right. And number 3 is a zina al-muhsan. Is zina if a person that had a marriage experience before and they had committed zina, then those are the only people that the government would have the right to basically implement the capital punishment on them. Yet, if a person was killed in basically an unjustly matter, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, جَعَلْنَا لِوَلِيِّهِ سُلْطَانًا. He would be giving his own guardians the power. Wait a minute, so what do you mean the power? Like what kind of power? It didn't say necessarily of what kind of power, but it was telling you that if you had been basically under any form of abuse or any form of trauma, then what you should be looking for is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising you to give you a compensation, and that this compensation would be in an abundant amount that He needed to tell you, فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ. So do not exceed the limit in seeking retaliation because somebody killed your loved one or etc., and exceed the limit and say, you know what, this person had killed my father, killed my brother, whatever it is, and start exceeding the limit that no, the value of my father, the value of this person is more than their value, and I'm going to basically feed my own anger and start killing left and right. So now we're speaking about whether we're speaking about anger, whether we're speaking about retaliation to basically feed the anger, whether we're speaking about different forms of israf. So in other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that you will be compensated, but don't exceed the limit. So who is this really talking to? This is talking to those that were victims of abuse, victims of torture, victims of different sorts of victims of different types of oppression, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to compensate them. And certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising them that He will give them the support. But this support, that they have to recognize that not because you were given this support, you were given this potential, you were given this empowerment, it does not mean you exceed the limit. So that takes us to another definition of israf, which is exceeding the limit of authority, or exceeding the limit in what potentials you might have and use them in where they don't belong. Using them in where they don't belong. In other words, you're supposed to be channeling whatever you were given, whether it's a compensation, whether it's a potential, whether it's an empowerment, whatever empowerment you have, using it in putting it where it belongs, that's a form of adl. The opposite of al-israf is al-adl, is justice. So now we get into another definition. Al-israf is basically putting things where they belong, whether that's empowerment, or whether that's a potential, whether that is a financial potential, whether this is a physical potential, whether this is intelligence, or whether this is whatever potential you would have, or even empowerment, maybe social potential. You have to put it where it belongs, because exceeding the limit is israf. Let's see what here is Shawkani. Shawkani comes from Yemen, and Shawkani was Shafi'i madhab, but before he was Shafi'i madhab, he was Shia. He was Zaidi, just to let you know. Yeah, Zaidi, kind of like the Houthis in Yemen. Well, that's what he was. Let's see. He said, what is meant by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbidden is that which He had made infallible to the infallibility of religion, or the infallibility of the covenant. Let's say in Arabic, وَالْمُرَادُ بِالَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ الَّتِي جَعَلَهَا مَعْصُومَةً بِعِصْمَةِ الدِّينِ وعصمة العهد، والمراد بالحق الذي استثناه هو ما يباح به قتل الأنفس المعصومة، وذلك كالردة والزنا في المحصن, etc. So we basically explained that one. So what is that supposed to mean? Shawkani is explaining this ayah and saying, well, exceeding the limit is basically by exceeding the limit in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had limited that area when is killing permitted. And he said that killing was permitted only in very rare cases, and therefore killing a person outside of these rare cases is actually considered as going beyond the limit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded in terms of human life having the sanctity and having the right of preservation, going beyond the limit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in what he had regarded in terms of deen, nafs, aql, ird, mal. Keep that one in mind, the DNAIM. So if a person goes beyond the limit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in shirk, that would be going beyond the limit. That would be called israf. 2, if a person goes beyond the limit in human life, killing people outside of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as permissible to be applied by the government. If a person does it, then that's exceeding the limit beyond human life. That's israf. Number 3, exceeding the limit in preserving the mind. So if a person is probably consuming maybe alcohol, drugs, etc., that would be exceeding the limit. Number 4, exceeding the limit outside of halal. Your wife is your only place of basically investing in the limit for halal relationship. Going beyond that is exceeding the limit. Exceeding the limit, whether we're speaking about how the ayah basically considered that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ فَمَنِ ابْتَغَى وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. There we go, exceeding the limit. If any type of a sexual relation, any way of sexual fulfillment for the desire that goes beyond the limit of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as the border. What is the border? Husband, wife, that was it. And certainly the slaves, when there were the concubines, those were basically the only ones. فَمَنِ ابْتَغَى, whoever exceeds that limit, فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ, then those are the ones that are the transgressors. Then finally, exceeding the limit in wealth, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically, for example, said, وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا, eat and drink and do not waste. In other words, don't exceed the limit in the amount that you're eating in the amount that you're consuming and drinking, consuming and eating. We're speaking about drinking, which is the halal drinking. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. Even if it's halal, you have to put yourself within the limit that it's not in abundance. All right, so now we recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Shawkani wanted to explain to us that when he said, جَعَلْنَا لِوَلِيهِ سُلْطَانًا, that they would be given the compensation, but you got to make sure that you stay within the limit. Okay, let's see. And by the way, Fath al-Qadir, I would say, since we are doing al-Qurtubi, Fath al-Qadir is really a summary of al-Qurtubi. It's really a summary of al-Qurtubi. So al-Qurtubi, sometimes may go in lots of details. Shawkani in his Fath al-Qadir, Fath al-Qadir is give or take like almost 9-10 volumes. That's basically it. Okay. Al-Qurtubi is in 21 volumes. We're on the 9th volume. Not too bad. I mean, yeah, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us some health and long life to basically complete it. Okay, in the ahadith that are authentic, we know that killing anybody without the right to do so is basically considered as a form of transgression. Let's say any form of a transgression basically going into, let's say, these boundaries. The Prophet ﷺ had said in the hadith, اجتنبوا السبع الموبقات. قالوا يا رسول الله وما هي؟ قال الشرك بالله والسحر وقتل النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق وأكل الربا وأكل مال اليتيم والتولي يوم الزحف وقذف المحصنات المؤمنات الغافلات. Okay, this hadith is narrated where? Bukhari and Muslim, and this is the number of it. Okay, let's see what it says in English. Avoid the 7 great destructive sins. They said, what are they? He said, associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, now that goes the D-N-A-I-M. So ashirku billah is basically the first type of israf. Sorcery. What is sorcery? So is actually sihr is not only sorcery. That's a little off in translation, because sihr is more of magic, black magic. Sorcery is more of fortune telling. Okay, more fortune telling. Sihr is black magic. So that's a little wrong translation. قتل النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق. In killing a soul which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbidden, except by right. What do you mean by right? Like there's somebody has the right to kill somebody? Well, only the government. But yes, there are certain times when a person basically exceeded certain limits. We mentioned the three different circumstances. That would be the right when the government would apply the capital punishment. riba, consuming usury. Usury, basically riba, interest. اليتيم, in consuming an orphan's wealth. I mean, what if they're living with me and I'm just using their own wealth for their own expenses? Then that's permissible. But akl means that you are taking it for your own personal benefit. التولي يوم الزحف. التولي, it's fleeing on the day of the battle. What do you mean fleeing on the day of the battle? Basically letting your friends stay in that whole battlefield and you're just running away from it in fear. قذف المحصنات المؤمنات الغافلات, and basically slandering the chaste women, the believing women who are unaware. But what do you mean unaware? Okay, let me explain that one. Scholars actually explained al-ghafila. In Lugha Arabiya, the word al-ghafila is actually supposed to be a very condescending term, but not here. When you say a person is ghafil in the Quran, usually, like I said, a condescending term to mean that this person is unaware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's borders, unaware of where the limits are, and they're exceeding those limits, and they would be living in ghafla. But within this ayah, no. The circumstances, or at least the context within this ayah is different. Because al-ghafila here, that these women are muhsanat, they're bashful, believing women, and they're ghafilat. Ghafilat on what? They're basically unaware of the different trends, the different walks of the illicit people. They're unaware of that. You know, there'll be probably these people that would be laughing about this woman, that she's probably not being trendy, that she's a city girl or a country girl, or she's probably just too innocent. That's that area. You know, so al-ghafilat, a better translation for that would actually be not unaware, but innocent. Because al-ghafila, she's innocent, she doesn't understand, and she does not know much about this type of culture that everyone is basically probably getting into, whether it's a certain pose or a certain huff and puff on their bodies, and all this type of bringing attraction and methods of bringing attraction, certain clothes, certain poses, certain talks, certain words, and she would be unaware of these types of words and what they really mean. She's so innocent that she does not know that these types of words are basically a way of the guy calling her to something, or that this type of word or this type of behavior basically means such and such. And this is really important to keep in mind, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting the ladies, the mu'minat, know that there are certain trends you don't belong within that area. There are certain cultures you don't belong within this type of culture, because that's what would be called خوارم المروءة. They're practicing these cultures, and that's why you look at the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ, said in the hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had cursed the women that are al-washima, al-wasila, and al-namisa, wal-mutanamisa, etc. So cursed to certain people. I mean, if we're talking about al-namisa, wal-mutanamisa, I mean, I mean, she's the one that's being done to her. Why the woman that's doing it? Because it's an environment. It's an environment. Tattooing, it's an environment. And those that would braid their teeth, or those that would basically change their appearance and all this cosmetic things in blowing up a certain area of the body or enhancing a certain area, that's basically the shaitan's method. And that's, yes, that is haram. Even though many women are not taking the time to basically learn about these rulings, it's basically haram to, I don't know, make this Brazilian whatever, and basically injecting whatever. That is only permissible if there's a deformity to correct. A deformity is not you and I to think whether it's a deformity or not, because you're not comfortable with your nose shape or not comfortable with how thin your lips are, and you are feeling that, oh, it's making me psychologically uncomfortable and I feel people are looking at it and etc. Then your problem is not with your appearance, dear. Your problem is within your confidence. It's within. Islam wanted you, every time you look at the mirror, Allahumma hassan khuluqi kama hassanta khalqi. Ya Allah, perfect my appearance, my akhlaq, the way that my morals, my mannerisms, as you had perfected my appearance. Islam wanted you to be a person of confidence. Islam wanted you to be away from this trend that all these women are basically, or a majority of the women are basically following. You don't belong within this area. You don't belong. Let them laugh at you. That's okay. Congrats if they're laughing at you, because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Bada al-Islamu ghariban wa sayaudu ghariban kama bada." The Prophet ﷺ said, Islam will start out in a strange way and it will come back in a strange way. And the narrator said, "Fatuba lil-ghuraba." And those that are the weirdos, the strange people, those are the ones that he said, you know, tuba. It's like, congrats for those people. People may see them as weird, may see them as looking strange, may laugh at them. You know what? You can laugh. Those are ghafilat, mu'minat. You can laugh. That mu'min, that mu'mina does not even blink at that such a laughter. In fact, she takes that as a compliment. Thank you very much for reminding me. And hopefully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will consider me as part of those weirdos, those that would be بدأ الإسلام غريبا وسيعود غريبا. Ibn Taymiyyah had basically considered that, based on the hadith, as basically we would say that this hadith is basically in a Sahihain. What do we mean by Sahihain? This is basically talking about Sahihain, meaning meaning the Hadith Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari. That narrated upon Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. He said, I asked, O Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the capital sin? So we're talking about the major sin right there. Yes, the greatest sin. And he said, أن تجعل لله ندا وهو خلقك. He said, to set a rival to Allah, even though He was the one that created you. And then I asked, he said, and then I asked, then what? He said, أن تقتل ولدك خشية أن يطعم معك. To kill your child for fear that he might eat with you. So this is talking about literal eating? No, it's basically in fear of poverty, and you don't want your child, you don't want more children because you want to, I guess, spend more on yourself. So it's that selfishness that you don't want more children to take up of your wealth. So that's basically what it means to taqtul waladak. Okay, then what? He said, أن تزاني بحليلة جارك. To commit adultery with your neighbor's wife. Why neighbor's wife? Because they are trusting that you are next to them. And you knew when this man was going out of the household because you could see it from your window. And then when this person leaves the household, you basically go and sneak and you cheat with his wife on him. So what do? This person was basically trusting you as a next door neighbor, but instead you basically get trespassing your border and go and basically committing zina with the neighbor's wife. And that's why you could see in the ayah, وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَدْعُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ وَلَا يَقْتُلُونَ النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ وَلَا يَزْنُونَ. And this ayah is basically combining all the three. Those that would not associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those that would not kill the soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbidden, and those that would not commit zina. And he said that's why the scholars had basically put within the parameter that whether we're speaking about killing somebody or committing zina, that would be considered as exceeding the limit. And therefore, if a person were to exceed in this haram limit, that would be considering it as the top part of that angle within that triangle. Okay, al-israf al-makruh. That's a second type of israf, that basically reprehensible extravagance. So this person is so what does that look like? It's a type of extravagance in a matter that has a basis in Islamic law. But then this person goes beyond the limit. What do you mean has a basis in Islamic law? Is there a basis in Islamic law? Well, yes. But then we're speaking about things such as what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had not forbidden within basically Islam. So what does that mean? We're going to see those examples. Okay, Islam basically told you not to exceed. So you're within the border of Islam, but then told you that there's a certain limit that you're not supposed to be exceeding, whether we're speaking about matters in dunya or whether we're speaking about matters in deen. Wait a minute. So I thought the deen basically had borders in regards to that. Not everything. There are certain, and especially that's where taqwa lies, basically. There are certain areas that perhaps the deen itself wasn't necessarily assigning exactly where the limit begins and ends, but told you that you have to have the taqwa. There are certain things that, you don't necessarily have a certain limit of where I'm supposed to be considering it as a beyond this line, beyond this border, that this is haram. But if it leads to any form of trespassing the boundary or getting close to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had put as a limit, then in that situation, that is this israf al-makruh. And in that situation, that would be that bid'ah. Let's see right here how they translated it. It said it becomes reprehensible and detestable extravagance in circumstances like what? It goes beyond the bounds of commanded moderation in Sharia. So once, if it goes beyond the commanded moderation, and then Islamic law does not command it, but rather forbids it, if it went beyond the moderation of Sharia. This applies to worldly matters. If it is related to religion, the basic principle is to refrain and not exceed what had been legislated, because this leads to reprehensible extremism, which is exceeding the sunnah in something that has a basis and was not commanded by the Prophet ﷺ. It is feared that whoever commits it will exceed what the Prophet ﷺ had or did not legislate for his sunnah. This is forbidden, a forbidden innovation. And every innovation is misguidance. Beautiful translation, by the way. Okay, so what is the border of that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِيمَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُمْ ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا مما قضيت ويسلموا تسليما. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's see the translation right there. But no, by your Lord, they will not believe until they make you judge concerning that over which they dispute among themselves, and then find within themselves no discomfort from what you have judged, and submit in full willing submission. Translation is not that accurate. Let's say, by Allah and by your Lord, they would not be believers unless the word is yuhakkimuk. What is yuhakkim? Yuhakkim basically means to put you as the one that defines the different ways to judge on different matters. So what does that look like? Tahkim can be in matters that we don't necessarily have a definitive answer for. And the tahkim could also be in personal dispute that I'm asking you to judge in this or that matter. But the word fima shajara bainahum, that shajara actually meant trees. Right, it means trees, but here is shajar basically means what rises amongst them. And when you talk about shajara, shijar is basically a quarrel. What's the relationship between shajara bainahum as a tree? Because when the trees and their twigs go too many, then they start going around each other and possibly then stopping the water supply from the other twigs or from the other parts of the tree. So that's fima shajara bainahum. It can happen that when people are in dispute with one another, that they can trespass each other's borders just like a tree, and then they would cut off, whether we're speaking about sunlight or whether we're speaking about water supply, etc., or even sometimes that the tree branches are so intertwined together that they're just basically at each other, and it's trying to basically find each is trying to quarrel with the other and taking over space. ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا مما قضيت. In order for them to really be mu'mineen, they would have to first regard you, O Muhammad, basically in your sunnah and the Quran, as basically the reference, the resource that they would go back to in case of dispute. And then on the inside, they would not have any haraj. What is a haraj? Haraj is a form of discomfort. They would not feel that, oh, I'm not comfortable. I don't feel good with this. And then they would probably want to give up on the order because it basically contradicts their place of interest. But وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا, what they would be living in is in this type of submission, that they would submit to the rule even if it is not serving their favor. Why? وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. What the Prophet had ordered you to do, then do, and what he had forbid you from doing, then you're going to be refraining from it. That's a believer. In the hadith, this is basically letting us know that those borders that the Prophet ﷺ had assigned within Sunnah are basically those borders that we are asked to not exceed the limit in. كل أمتي يدخلون الجنة إلا من أبى. قيل ومن يأبى يا رسول الله؟ قال من أطاعني دخل الجنة ومن عصاني فقد أبى. The Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, all my nation will enter paradise except those who refuse. It was said, and who would refuse, O Messenger of Allah? He said, whoever obeys me will enter paradise, and whoever disobeys me had basically taken the choice to refuse. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, this is a key one for this matter. هَلَكَ الْمُتَنَطِّعُونَ. هلك المتنطعون. هلك المتنطعون. What is هلك المتنطعون? هلك المتنطعون, the extremists are doomed. Wait a minute. I thought Islam is, what do you mean the extremists are doomed? Who are the extremists? Aren't we extremists? No. An extremist is a person that exceeds the limit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as his limit. That's the extremist. So it's not by wearing niqab, and it's not by wearing, I don't know, making a long beard. No, that's not the extremist. An extremist is a person that exceeds the limit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had assigned. Okay, that's the extremist. And he said it 3 times. So if we're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting a certain limit for, let's say, wudu, for salah, for whatever it is, then that situation, you're basically going to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is another hadith. It's strange that he didn't mention it here. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-munbat la ardan qata' la dhahran abqa wa la ardan qata'. A person that is an extremist is basically, they, imagine it as they had a means of transportation, which is an animal in this case. And then they tried to hurry to get to their destination by making this animal basically run as fast as they can. But this animal, it was running as fast as it can, but then even though it basically was running as fast as it can, in the middle of the way, this animal basically broke down. And when this animal broke down, this person ended up, did not yet get to his destination. He may need to walk the rest of the path if he may. And he did not even leave his mean of transportation. So he didn't get to his destination, neither did he leave his mean of transportation. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ called him al-munbat, the person that is exceeding the limit. So now we're seeing exceeding the limit can mean in exceeding the limit in not recognizing the borders of Sharia, not recognizing the borders of Quran and Sunnah. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man amila amalan laysa alayhi amruna fahuwa radd." Whoever does an action that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had not assigned is basically going to be rejected. In other words, they went farther than what the Prophet ﷺ had regarded as the safe border. Let's see. Al-israf al-makruh fi din. Is it possible that we can actually have israf and exceed the limit in religion? Like, how do you get an extravagance in religion? So number one, extravagance in religion is basically going beyond what the religion had basically assigned as the border. So this isn't a woman wearing niqab, meaning that, oh, she's exceeding the limit, this is just too much. Or a man having a beard, oh, this is too much. Okay, what we would mean as extremism or excessiveness in the religion is what would be considered as defined as the limit within the religion. Okay, so whether that is one falling in bid'ah, falling in innovation, or whether this is falling in something that is haram. So if you were to take off your hijab because you are told that this is just giving too much of modesty, and that you need to be in moderation, and their definition of moderation is probably being, I don't know, half naked. That's their limit of moderation. But here then we would say, well, no, we would go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to define these limits. Let's say, what does excessive limit in worship, is there such a thing? Yes. Let's see in this hadith, جاء 3 رهط إلى بيوت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يسألون عن عبادة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. These 3 guys, they came in to the household of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم and asking about the worship of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. And what did they do? When they were informed, they seemed to find it insignificant. that كأنهم تقالوها. تقالوها does not mean insignificant. تقالوها means that they regarded that it wasn't an abundant amount. It wasn't in a big amount. In other words, the تقالوها means they found it that it was small. It wasn't that big. And they said, well, we're different than the Prophet ﷺ. His sins were forgiven, the future sins and the past sins. As for us, we're different. So the first one said, I would, for myself, I would pray out throughout the night. I would pray throughout the night. And the second one said, I would fast throughout the years, and I would never break my fast. And the third one said, I would abandon women and not ever get married. So the Prophet ﷺ comes in and he says, you had said such and such, even though I am the most God-fearing of you, but I would fast and eat, and I would sleep and pray, or pray and sleep, and I would marry the women, and whoever goes against my path is not amongst me, and they're not part of me. So what does that mean? Well, this is basically to let us know that we're talking about exceeding the limit basically in how the Prophet ﷺ had practiced the religion himself. So whether in innovation or whether we're exceeding the limit in what the Prophet ﷺ had basically taught as an inspiration or as teachings, and that's going to be exceeding the limit in ibadah. Let's see Subul al-Sam'ani in Subul al-Salam, sorry, not Subul al-Sam'ani, but Subul al-Salam. And you could see this guy's also Yemeni. We have a lot of Yemenis here in Malaysia, by the way, a lot of Yemenis. And you know what? I didn't know Yemenis were like that, to be honest. We didn't have a lot of Yemenis in Minnesota, only 2 families, really, but Yemenis are pretty active, and they engage in business, and they'll find different ways to figure things out. Some cultures, I would say Syrians, I would say perhaps Palestinians, Yemenis, when it comes to at least the ones, the Arab that I had seen here, mashallah, doing a great job in figuring themselves out and figuring out ways to basically make a living and live and move on in their life. Quite interesting to see certain cultures, other cultures, sorry, no offense, but other cultures, they rely on others to basically subsidize or wait for others to perhaps maybe figure something out as a solution to their problems. But I would say that all respect to the others, but I had seen these I'm sure other cultures, but I just noticed from, at least from the Arab, I noticed that Palestinians, Syrians, and Yemenis, they basically do whatever it takes to stand on their feet. If it means college, they'll go to college. If it means getting a business, they'll get a business. If it means selling shawarma on the street, they'll sell shawarma on the street, whatever it takes. And I must admit, it's quite interesting. The same thing when you go to Turkey, you find all these Syrians basically doing all these different things. I mean, I'm not saying that there weren't any Syrians that were basically, begging and depending on others to basically give them. I mean, every single country has its ups and downs, but at the same time, I would really see that certain countries, you do have a large number of people that would break all those barriers and willing to overcome the challenge. So yeah, I must admit, Subul Salam Lissanhani. Just wanted to say something about Yemenis, man. Yemeni restaurants, Yemeni businesses here are probably the only ones that are competing with maybe the Malaysian ones, to be honest. You have to remember that they are a small minority. It's not that they're a large number of people, but they're a small minority. But, the Hadramaut restaurants, the Balqis restaurants, all of that, you would see it everywhere. And guess what? There's a restaurant nearby, Sabat restaurant, and it would be packed, and all of them are Malaysians. The customers are mainly Malaysians. You would think that they're all Arab. The Malaysians are loving their food as well. Okay, let's get into the Subul Salam right there. Okay, Subul Salam. Subul Salam basically is It's in only 4 volumes, 5 volumes. If you're looking at the, that extra glossary and all of that. 4 volumes, not too big. But what I like about that, I did actually think of making the same type of sharh that I did for al-Qurtubi and do it for Subul al-Salam. That could be the next book that I would be doing. Subul al-Salam, it only focuses on the ahadith that relate to legislation. Only the ahadith that relate to legislation. And therefore, of course, Bulugh al-Maram is the main book for Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Bulugh al-Maram I saw copies that are in almost 120 pages, and they pass them out like in small booklets for people to memorize, okay, in small booklets. San'ani then came in and basically wanted to make a detailed explanation for all the hadith that are in Bulugh al-Maram. Okay, so that's basically San'ani. And what did he say? He said, and this is, or the hadith clearly demonstrates the Prophet's rejection of this extremism and excess in worship, and the excess in it with what he had not legislated or prescribed for his nation, despite the legitimacy of the actions that these people wanted to perform. This is because it is extremism and the excess that contradicts human nature and its ability to endure. Okay, it's a beautiful, beautiful explanation right there. But is that necessarily what Subul al-Salam said? Hold on, I think I didn't read Subul al-Salam. Here's Subul al-Salam. He said, it is evidence that the project is to be moderate in acts of worship without being preoccupied with or harming oneself and abandoning all familiar things, and that the law of this Muhammadan religion, okay, is built on moderation, facilitation, making things easy and not making things difficult. And as the ayah says, Allah intends for you ease and does not intend for you hardship. So is this really Muhammadan religion? Is this really what he says? وَأَنَّ هَذِهِ الْمِلَّةِ الْمُحَمَّدِيَّةِ. So Muhammadan religion is a different translation than al-millat al-Muhammadiyya. What's the difference? Okay. Well, the difference when you say al-millat al-Muhammadiyya, we're talking about within the Arabic language, this isn't meaning that we worship Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But in English, to call it a Muhammadan religion, it may give the connotation that we worship the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. But in Islam, Millat al-Muhammadiyya, we recognize that we take the Sunnah from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and not worship the Prophet himself. Okay. And that's the difference. And even though, yes, it would be a translation, at least a verbatim right there, a translation. But in English, this would mean that we worship the Prophet. And certainly this was not, this is, and even before they used to call it Muhammadan religion, which basically gave the connotation that we would worship the Prophet. Okay, so in the end, to make the story short, in religion, excessiveness in religion is basically in this statement. فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. Whoever exceeds the limits of what the Prophet himself had demonstrated is basically going beyond what the Prophet had considered as the limit. Let's see, al-israf al-makruh fi dunya. There's israf, there's excessiveness that is hated in religion, and which is going beyond the limit of what the Prophet had taught. And there's the israf al-makruh in dunya, in matters. So what does that look like? Number one is exceeding the limit in eating, drinking, and clothes. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya bani Adam khudu زينتكم عند كل مسجد وكلوا واشربوا ولا تسرفوا إنه لا يحب المسرفين. O children of Adam, take your adornment at every masjid and eat and drink, but not excessive. Indeed, he does not like those who commit excess. I mean, do a better translation. Let's see Shawkani again right there. I don't know why this person is obsessed with Yemenis. I mean, that's okay. Those are great scholars. The Sam'ani, Shawkani, one of the best great scholars. Shawkani wrote a book, one of my favorite. It is called Nail al-Awtar. Nail al-Awtar, it's in 7 volumes in certain prints and 5 volumes in other prints. And what that book was basically for, it was for explaining the hadith that Ibn Taymiyyah al-Jadd basically combined in terms of the hadith of legislation. And I love that book. Our professor used to make us study that book, and that was the book that we basically studied. We had to buy that copy and study it. We didn't study the whole thing, but he would take excerpts and we studied different chapters. Okay, what is a zina? Zina is basically anything that anybody would basically take in terms of beautification. So adornment, and then of course Islam was basically telling them, well, when you go to the masjid, I want you to embrace that adornment within the limit. So in other words, Islam put a limit that when you go to the masjid, don't put perfume, don't put fragrance. That's the limit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. As for man, well, don't exceed the limit and start wearing gold and all of that. That's your limit. وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا, and eat and drink and do not exceed the limit in your eating and drinking. In other words, even if it is halal consumption, you want to make sure that you stay within the limit that is necessary. So how much is the limit of eating and drinking? Okay. The Prophet ﷺ said, ما ملأ ابن آدم وعاء شرا من بطنه حسب ابن آدم أكلات يقمن صلبه فإن كان فاعلا لا محالة فثلث لطعامه وثلث لشرابه وثلث لنفسه. That's the amount. So what does that look like? That the Prophet ﷺ basically said in this hadith, let's look at it right there. I'm trying to get you the hadith, the English translation. Okay, the English translation, that the Prophet ﷺ said, it is enough for the son of Adam to basically get his needs, and certainly there's nothing worse to fill the stomach of Adam than worse basically than ما ملأ ابن آدم وعاء شرا من بطنه. Any filling for Ibn Adam, there's nothing worse than filling his own stomach. It is enough for the son of Adam to take a few morsels of food to make him standing. And if he needed to and was in need, then make it into 3 different parts. 1/3 for his food, the other for his drinking, and the other for linafasihi. And the 3rd is for his breathing. وَثُلُثٌ لِنَفَسِهِ, for his breath. That's basically the hadith. It is sufficient for the son of Adam to eat a few mouthfuls to keep him strong. If he must do so, then 1/3 should be for his food, 1/3 for his drink, and another for his breath. So فَثُلُثٌ لِطَعْمِهِ وَثُلُثٌ لِشَرَابِهِ وَثُلُثٌ لِنَفَسِهِ. Did I say لِنَفْسِهِ before? لِنَفَسِهِ. I believe I said لِنَفْسِهِ. Okay, let's see. Al-israf al-mubah. So what is considered as israf that is permissible? Well, the permissible one is basically the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith, إن الله حرم عليكم عقوق الأمهات ومنعا وهات ووأد البنات وكره لكم قيل وقال وكثرة السؤال وإضاعة المال. What did he say? The Prophet ﷺ, so now we're going to the 3rd type, the 3rd section. The Prophet ﷺ basically said in the hadith, God had forbidden upon you to be disobedient to your mothers. Why the mothers, not the fathers? Because in other hadith, he did mention the fathers. And most people are willing to transgress the limits of their mothers more than their fathers, because the fathers would basically be authoritative and the fathers know how to put a limit. Mothers can sometimes be easier to trespass because they're not as strong, and the mothers sometimes get too emotional and sometimes are too giving. Once you are too giving, then that creates people that are basically living thinking that they're entitled. And therefore, without us realizing, our giving and our excessive giving and our emotions may sometimes exceed the limit. And at the end of the day, this may actually result in creating people that are feeling entitled, and then at the end of the day, not even respect your borders and boundaries with you. So moms, please pay attention to this one. You could be creating people that are aqeen, people that don't know their limits, people that may be thinking that they're entitled and then not even recognize that they have to be giving to others. They're creating selfish people. That's why sometimes the mothers, they could be more vulnerable to this kind of uquq. وَمَنْعًا وَهَاتٍ. What is man'an wahat? Here, man'an wahat, let's see, to withhold from your parents. No, that's not what it means. Man'an wahat, mana means to prevent something. Hat is to take. Okay, not hat what you wear on your head. Man'an wahat, a person that yamna huquqillah, a person that would prevent in giving what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered that you would give, just like zakah. And hat, you would take, you would want to consume, you would want to take in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you that was not within your right to take. That's man'an wahat. وَوَأْدِ الْبَنَاتِ, and to basically bury the daughters alive. وَكَرِهَ لَكُمْ قِيلَ وَقَالَ, and he hated for you that she said and he said, and asking too many questions and wandering the money. There's this hadith right there. It's probably the most important hadith in learning about the limit. Limit in terms of your social relations, learning the limits and what you consume and what you give and what you share, and learning the limit in how you would preserve the life of others or those that are vulnerable, and learning the limit of your speech. The limit of your speech, and in other words, to reduce that limit of speech, just take out the word she said, he said, because you're going to find yourself engaging in all these dramas, engaging in all that talk and trivial talk, and then that's going to pacify you away from dhikr. And then another form in kathrat as-su'al, just asking too many questions. That what kind of questions? This is not asking too many questions in talab al-ilm, but this is asking too many questions that are not within your area of having the right to know. So where did you go? How much did you spend? How much money are you making? How much? All these different things. That's a personal question. I'd like to keep it confidential. Please do not ask questions that do not belong to you and that are not within your jurisdiction to ask. That's kathrat as-su'al. Islam told you, I want you to not exceed the limit in asking and trying to seek information about people, because this is their area and not yours. وَإِضَاعَةُ الْمَالِ, and إِضَاعَةُ الْمَالِ is wandering the money. So now we're saying, one, social extravagance, okay? And we're saying basically consumption extravagance, whether in giving or taking. And then we're seeing, let's say, word and this type of talk extravagance. And we're saying, hey, trespassing people's boundaries, and basically financial extravagance. Now, this basically tells us that in terms of wandering money, some of that is basically looking at, well, what is permissible to use the money on, and what is not permissible, and what is considered as not appropriate at least culturally. So whether this was bringing in if it's bringing in what you are trying to use that money to probably put your children in, let's say, maybe expensive schools, but you're putting them in these expensive schools, and it was to basically get the best opportunities. That's not wandering the money. That's not wandering. Okay. And if it's to avoid a dangerous thing, you're probably living in a rich, classy area because it tends to have less, let's say, maybe violence rate, drug rate, etc. Well, why? Because to you, you recognize that you want to protect your children, even though you're paying more. But, oh, just a second. Sorry about that. So let's continue. No voice. Yeah, I know. I muted myself. I got a very important phone call. Okay. So what I'm sorry, but I have to stop right here. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. Because I got an important phone call. Need to go really quick. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll actually continue this because there's a lot of. Oh, actually, there's not much. Can I actually just finish this today? Yeah, inshallah, I will. Let's do it. Okay. So let's go for the other question, which is there an excessiveness in what is considered as permissible within Sharia? So, for example, reading too much of Quran, is there such a thing as reading too much of Quran? Is there such a thing as doing too much istighfar? The answer is no. There's no too much of that. It's always good. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ ذِكْرًا وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. There's no limit. There's no excessiveness in seeking ilm. There's no excessiveness in doing dhikr. There's not too much. This is too much of dhikr. This is too much of istighfar. And that's why every single road that you would take, من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علما سهل الله به طريقا إلى الجنة. Whoever seeks a path to seek ilm, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it easy for them to find the path to Jannah. So when you're looking at what Islam had considered in terms of dhikr and all of that, there's no limit. There's no excessiveness in that. What about the things in, for example, in giving sadaqat, etc.? So in the end, there is a limit that you basically have to consider that your family basically is the first place that you want to make sure that they are getting the necessary needs for them. That's that area. Okay, that's the foundation. And therefore, once you go beyond and start giving donations when your family is in need, then that's excessiveness. Because you were supposed to consider that your family is basically supposed to be your first priority. And that's why when this man said, when he said, should I donate in third, and he said, a thulth. Oh, I gotta go. Assalamu alaikum. We'll come back to you tomorrow, inshallah. Oh, sorry.